Black Phone 2 has finally arrived just in time for Halloween, and the anticipated horror sequel fits neatly into an ever-growing pantheon of spooky supernatural stories. The film takes place several years after Scott Derrickson's original The Black Phone, following Finney and his sister as they hunt down the elusive grabber once more. Black Phone 2 has already performed fairly well at the box office, and it's also receiving a very warm reception from critics and general audiences alike. But with that being said, it's a very different kind of movie from the original. Where The Black Phone was a tense, atmospheric thriller, this is a much more overt, supernatural horror story. Here are a few others that fit this new vein. Mama was the breakout project of Andy Muschietti, the acclaimed director behind It and The Flash. This dark, atmospheric movie tells the story of two young girls who return home after living their childhoods in the jungle, who seem to have brought some dark spirit back with them. Much like Black Phone 2, Muschietti's Mama is a slow, brooding story of demons and curses that ultimately reveals itself to be a very astute, powerful rumination on family and sacrifice. The film knows exactly how to scare its audience at the right moment, but it's the richly layered screenplay that really elevates this project above the competition. Perhaps most famous for its memorable plot twist, the others essentially set the groundwork for the modern ghost story. The film centers around a single mother and her several children who move into a new home and quickly become convinced that the building is haunted. The Others features one of Nicole Kidman's best performances to date. While it's a much slower, more gothic story than Black Phone 2, both films notoriously blur the line between real people and ghosts, keeping the audience on the edge of their seats with its stirring deconstruction of what comes after death. They're both films that don't rely on jump scares, but rather use their brooding atmospheres to get under your skin. The Strangers may not have the ghouls and ghosts that make Black Phone 2 such a frightening story, but it plays with many of the same innate, deep-rooted fears. It's a very psychological story that doesn't beat the audience with overt scares, but rather asks them important questions about what they would do in the darkest imaginable circumstances. The Strangers has been rebooted several times, but the 2008 original remains arguably the most effective entry in this franchise. Its premise of a spontaneous home invasion is disarmingly simple, but these characters are so frightening, and Brian Bertino's direction is so slick that it's managed to age surprisingly well. Much like The Strangers, Fede Alvarez's Don't Breathe takes a very simple idea and uses its visceral, turbulent screenplay to elevate it way beyond the words on the page. The story centers around a group of teens who decide to steal from an old neighbor, but soon realize they've bitten off more than they can chew. In a similar fashion to Black Phone 2, this psychological thriller works because of how effortlessly the story revolves around this complex villain. Stephen Lang's lead performance, much like Ethan Hawke's turn as the grabber, is the beating heart of this film, and it wouldn't be anywhere near as effective without him. Incidentally, The Black Phone wasn't the first time that Ethan Hawke and Scott Derrickson had worked together on such a dark, invigorating horror movie. The pair previously collaborated on 2012's Sinister, which remains one of the most underrated haunted house movies of the past few decades. In the film, Hawke plays a crime writer who moves into a new home with his family, but soon learns that the building has an incredibly bloody and violent past. As he continues to make dark discoveries about the house he's brought his family to, Hawke's protagonist finds himself on a dangerous descent into paranoia and fear. Sinister is often called one of the scariest movies ever made, and it's not a baseless claim. The movie is filled with effective jump scares, and Derrickson would later apply this knack for raising the audience's heart rate to his later films. In many ways, Sinister is the blueprint for movies like The Black Phone and its sequel. There have been countless studies done about why audiences respond strongly to ghost stories, and particularly those that take place within a family home. But the most obvious reason is that they remind us of how fragile our lives are. They play on the universal human fear of the unknown, and bring that into a space that's supposed to be safe. Jennifer Kent's movie follows a widowed mother who spirals when her young son becomes convinced that something evil and unseen is sharing their home. It was one of the first movies to kick off the recent wave of domestic supernatural horror, which has become increasingly popular over the years. The influence of The Babadook is easy to spot all throughout Black Phone 2. Both films clearly use their dark, supernatural antagonists as catalysts to explore more grounded, character-level conflict. This relatability makes both films even more frightening. They're not just ghost stories, but stories about our ghosts. The concept of an investigative hero going toe-to-toe with a criminal antagonist is nothing new in the horror genre, and The Silence of the Lambs may be the most prolific example of this specific archetype. Jonathan Demme's 1994 thriller is a perfect example of how to blend this cat-and-mouse chase with a much darker, more disturbing storyline. The Silence of the Lambs tells the story of an FBI trainee named Clarice Starling, who employs the help of a convicted killer named Hannibal Lecter to help her solve another case that's causing her trouble. But when Clarice struggles to separate her work with Lecter from her ongoing investigation, things become much more complicated. There are clear parallels between Clarice and Hannibal's dynamic in The Silence of the Lambs and Finney and the Grabber's dynamic in Black Phone 2, but the real similarity between these two films is in their grimy, gritty aesthetics. Black Phone 2 feels very much like a horror movie of its time, but it's also one that wears its classic influences on its sleeve. The very concept of the Grabber coming back as an incorporeal, demonic spirit that haunts its victims from another realm feels like a direct reinvention of Freddy Krueger, one of the all-time iconic horror villains. The original Nightmare on Elm Street centers around a group of teenagers who are cursed by a supernatural creature who hunts and murders them in their dreams. It's much more of an overt slasher than Black Phone 2, but many of the plot logistics work in the same way and feel directly inspired. A Nightmare on Elm Street is often cited as one of the best horror movies of the 90s, and it's not just Black Phone 2 that's clearly inspired by it. The movie's reach has been enormous. Wes Craven essentially redefined the slasher genre with this project in 1984, and we're still seeing the effects of it today.